Hi, I'm Tom Long. And wow, did you see the Apple announcements? Probably the most exciting one was the new iPhone 10. And Engadget had a nice spreadsheet about the iPhone 10, comparing it to other flagship phones. And it got me to thinking about whether or not I wanted to get the iPhone 10 Anniversary Edition, kind of like a bookend to the original iPhone, which I also had. And so I tried to translate some of the things that were in that spreadsheet, which you can find in the link in my show notes. I tried to extract from that what the pros and cons might be and what are some of the questions that I might have about buying the iPhone 10. And my sister's going through the same kind of thought process. And so we thought it might be a good idea to share that with you and get some feedback on what you're thinking. So the iPhone 10 Pros that I would pull off of that is, uh, well, first of all, it's kind of gorgeous, right? I mean, when I see that in somebody's hand, which unfortunately I don't have one yet because I'm not a real reviewer or anything like that, so I don't get preview copies. And but looking at those videos, I'm thinking this is one gorgeous phone. It did something that Apple has really been lagging on. So, as someone who has switched back and forth between Android and iPhone numerous times, one of the things I really like about the Android phones that I've had is that they have very small bezels. So I get a lot of screen for the amount of phone that I have to carry around in my pocket, which is kind of important to me. If you carry your phone in a man purse or a bag, then maybe it's not that big of a deal. But the iPhone 10 is giving you this beautiful big screen in a very compact package because there are no bezels. So big plus, good job iPhone. Uh, the second thing is the camera. DxOMark last year said that the Pixel actually had the best smartphone camera ever. So the Pixel actually had leapfrogged Apple in terms of the quality of their iPhone camera. But that's no longer the case. So they just recently tested the iPhone 8 Plus and found out that it had a better camera than any other smartphone. So that's the new king of the heap, at least until the iPhone 10 comes out here at the end of next month. And so camera to me is super important. And on the iPhone 10, you get that some pretty cool things. So you get the portrait mode where you get the kind of background blur. If you were taking a picture of someone, you can have the background blurred out and get a very nice high-end camera look to that portrait, which makes this a tremendously flexible phone. And now they've added in, after the fact, you can make it look like you had professional lighting on the photo. And the demonstrations, again, are very intriguing. I'm curious to see how that's going to work out in real life. Another pro would be the video. If you like action or if you have quick moving kids or dogs, you might like the fact that you can shoot now in 1080p at 240 frames per second, which means that you can have that super smooth slow motion, watching Fido jump for the frisbee or Junior go off of the diving board in slow motion, those kinds of things, which I happen to think is awesome. And of course, it still shoots in 4K. Even in 4K, it'll shoot at 60 frames per second, which will give you a little bit of slow motion if that's what you're looking for, and still have that great high resolution. Screen quality. The True Tone Apple display is one of the best on any device for viewing photographs. So that would be another plus. And finally, the screen is an OLED screen. So Apple for ever has avoided the OLED screens that give you those inky blacks that you find on the Galaxy series of Android phones or on the Pixel phone. And now Apple has stepped up their game and they've got an OLED screen. And one of the things that Apple has always done is had really good color control so that when you take an image, the color that you see on the screen is actually what you saw in real life when you were taking that picture. Uh, Another great feature of this phone is its integration with the Apple Watch Series 3, which now comes with is available with both GPS and LTE, which means that you could actually, as they demonstrated, take phone calls while you're paddling your paddleboard down the back river. The new Apple Watch Series 3 with GPS and LTE is just really kind of enticing to me, and the only way it'll work is with an iPhone. So if you want to be able to take phone calls from your wrist while you're out on your kayak, canoe, paddleboard, boat, whatever you're doing, the only way to do it is to have an iPhone to work with that Apple Watch. And now the Apple Watch can even be taken with you surfing, which is something that I've been waiting for in a smartwatch. The other thing that to me is a pro, and I've already talked about how beautiful this phone is, but one of the things that one of the trends that's going on with the Android phones is that they're getting away from a normal 16:9 or 4:3 kind of aspect ratio to these super long, skinny screens that don't really fit with watching videos that are in a normal 16:9 aspect ratio. So to me, those phones just look kind of goofy. Maybe you like them. That's your own taste. That's fine. But to me, the iPhone 10 is much more appealing in appearance. And according to the leaks that I've seen on Google's upcoming flagship, the iPhone 10 is priced competitively with the upcoming Pixel 2 XL, if that price comes in where they say that it's supposed to. And the Note 8 is going to be about $60 less. So you're going to pay like $50 or $60 more for an iPhone 10. And the thing is, my Pixel battery does not hold a charge through the day. After 1 year, it's pretty much abysmal. I barely make it to the end of work, and I often don't even make it until it's time to go home from work before my battery dies. So that pretty much is bad, right? And then the before that, I had a Galaxy Note 4, and it was the same deal. In fact, I got that one. You had a replaceable battery, and I would get new batteries, and it still had terrible battery life after a year. And by the end of 2 years, you couldn't. It was useless. So to have a phone like the quality that Apple makes, where they work years later, my original iPhone still holds a charge. So hello Android, get with it. Those are some of the pros, but not everything in Apple land is totally perfect. There are a few cons with the iPhone 10. One of them is that the pixel density isn't quite as high as what you get with flagship Android phones. And you probably aren't going to notice that looking with the naked eye at the screen. You maybe slightly, but it's really not going to be that big of a deal compared to things like the true color display and the color depth that comes with that display. But where you're going to tell the difference is if you ever try to use it with a VR headset. So when that happens, you really see every pixel and you want the highest pixel density you can get. Another con is that there's no external storage. So there's no micro SD card that you can add in there to get greater storage later on if it turns out you're saving more files than you thought you would. And those 4K files, they take up a lot of space. So you're probably going to want to spring the extra money to get the 256 gigs of memory. Another con is that it's only IP67, which means it's splash proof, but it's not waterproof. So unlike the Galaxy series of Android phones, you're not going to be able to take this sucker into the pool and do cool shots in the pool or snorkeling or anything like that. Another con is if, like me, you prefer Google services, Google Maps, Google Assistant, Google Voice, etc., Google Calendar, Gmail, all of those things are less seamless when you're using an iPhone. So if your bias is toward those things, keep in mind that they're not going to work quite as nicely on your Apple iPhone. And while the iPhone does work with some VR headsets, it doesn't work with a universal controller like you get with the Daydream headset with the Pixel. That controller works with a whole slew of apps. You've got to get a different controller for every app in the Apple ecosystem at this point. So it's, again, the iPhone is really lagging behind in terms of VR, even though it's doing well in the area of AR, augmented reality. There's a lot of fun things you can do with that with the iPhone. But VR wise, with the lower pixel density, the lack of a universal controller, it's not quite there. And so those are some things that I think are going to give it some obsolescence. The fact that it's not going to be waterproof, the fact that you don't have the pixel density for VR, you don't have the universal controller. Now, there's some things that are neither pros nor cons. I just don't know how they're going to work out. So typically, for example, Apple puts less RAM in their phones than the Android phones, but because Apple makes their processors and the RAM and the software, everything is integrated, and they're still showing blazing speed in these Geekbench comparison tests with the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. So we're expecting that the iPhone 10, despite the fact that the amount of memory is questionable, is probably going to be pretty stinking fast. Another thing that's kind of a question mark, how is it going to work out in day-to-day life? I love the little fingerprint sensor on my Pixel. I just touch it and boom, my screen is up. It's very responsive. I'm not sure about this Face ID thing. Typically, Apple comes out with things that are pretty well polished, and I expect it'll be better than Face ID that we've seen in other ecosystems. But then there was, Apple Maps, and we just don't know whether this is going to fall into the category of half-baked or super awesome. Now, finally, I think we need to talk about the elephant in your face, if you will, and that is pretty much every tech reviewer is condemning the fact that this has a little notch cut out of the top of the screen. So they've done away with the bezels, but they left this little notch that covers up part of the screen. And the problem with that is that when you get into panoramic pictures, that there's no way to not have that notch cover up part of the picture. So to me, that's a big negative, because I like to shoot panoramic seascapes. And I don't, I put a lot of care into how I frame a picture. I don't want that notch covering it up. The good news, on the other hand, is that with a tap, you can get regular pictures or video to not have the notch overlaying the image. So only time will tell whether those kind of little niggling annoyances will somehow rob the iPhone 10 user of their joy over time, or whether this is a phone that's just going to grow with them. So if you're going to go for it, mark October 27 on your calendar. That's the date that we can pre-order this phone. If you decide that the pros outweigh the cons and the question marks are, you're willing to make that gamble on the reputation of Apple. And there is one little caveat. They're saying that the supply chain is pretty constrained. The number of phones that are going to be available at launch are going to be very few. So if you want an iPhone 10, be sure that you're sitting there ready at midnight to click that pre-order button as soon as it becomes available, because only the first few are actually going to get this phone. So if you think you might want it, jump on it. You can always take it back, right? If you decide that you don't like it. But you only get one chance to click that button and be one of the first to get the iPhone 10. And personally, I think it's going to be a pretty wonderful phone. So good luck in your shopping. I hope you find this to be helpful. And let me know. Are you going to go for it? Or are you going to wait and see some of the reviews after it's actually been used by other people for a while? Thank you. I'm Tom Long for Long Story Short, and we'll catch you next time.